Hello, and welcome to Creative Banter, a creativity and philosophy-focused podcast where anything goes. I'm your host, Cody Schultz. Joining me is the one and only Ben Horn. There have been two announcements regarding new film cameras which caught my eye recently, though neither of them are within an affordable price range. Still, it's nice to see new film equipment being released in 2022. Our primary interest in the episode, however, regards Peter Jackson's comment on hypnosis, and how he wishes he could have forgotten all the inner workings of the Lord of the Rings movies, so he could view them as the fans had, with fresh eyes. This leads us into discussions about legacy, and our innate desire to be one of the greats. Let's dive right into it, shall we? Still trying to get used to the whole Zencaster re-layout thing. It's very odd sometimes.
Yeah, it takes one small change or a big change.
But speaking of big changes, Leica just announced, Leica Rumors just announced that they will be making a new film camera coming in October.
Now they have some current ones. Do they have any current ones on the market? I know I looked a little bit a while back, but I'm not too familiar with their lineup.
They have the MP, and then they have the MA, I think it is. But you're talking like 13-year-old cameras at this point. They're quite old in what they have. I mean, not like there's much to a 35 millimeter film camera, but it's still.
Yeah, even saying like a 13-year-old Leica camera, to me, I'm like, that sounds like a new Leica, camera compared to what we're used to. So it does make me wonder what all they'll do to it. If I remember right, the one that I guess is the one that was out most recently was a fairly stripped down model, but I don't know too much about it. But it doesn't really take much for a Leica. I mean, it's just a metal block that does what it does.
Yeah, pretty much. Another light, tight piece of metal or plastic. I think most of them are plastic now. But yeah, I'm curious to see what kind of features, if anything, they add to it, and design-wise and all of that.
Yeah.
But
does that have you? Because I mean, you got the other the medium format camera a while back. I've got no true desire for a Leica, because I know I just sit there, but as a they're cool cameras though.
Yeah, they are. I just kind of like you, I'm starting to lose my desire for one though, because they would just kind of, I'd feel so bad taking it out all the time, especially if it gets like banged up or something. Then you just spent like $6,000 on a camera that's just gonna get abused.
Yeah.
But in other news too, if you think $6,000 is bad on something, luxury car maker Pagani, I think that's how you pronounce it, they partnered with a large format camera company from Italy called Ghibellini, and they are producing 75 8x10 cameras that cost $110,000 each.
Huh.
I'll let that sink in.
Yeah. I think the world has lost their mind. I don't get it. Is it more light proof of a box than the Leica? Maybe, I don't know. That's a lot of money.
It is a really sleek looking design. I'll give them that. Like, it is a very clean, nice looking camera. But so is a Chamonix for what, a quarter the price?
Yeah, I mean, stuff like that. I know that they're catering to a specific market there, but I don't know.
I think it's funny with this article. It goes through and it says the camera is designed for gelatin silver film that produces crisp black and white photos. So I guess you can't shoot color in this one.
Can't shoot color.
Black and white only.
For $100,000, it only somehow only shoots black and white. But yeah, that is. It's funny the way they describe stuff like that, or trying to make things more. I don't know. Try to build things up to be greater than they are, but
Yeah. On the bright side, it comes with a tripod.
that's. I mean, it better at that.
It
that
comes
price
with
point.
a tripod, a nice leather case. It's the same leather that's used to upholster the seats and interior of the Pagani hypercars. It's yeah. This is just out of hand.
Yeah,
I just love reading through this article. Just the way that they describe everything, just is so
yeah,
out of touch.
yeah. Especially of all times to come out with something like that. It doesn't seem like this is the best of times. Not that there is an ideal time overall, but yeah, I don't know. I all I know is I would make a horrible rich person, just from the standpoint that none of the things that seem to bring people joy that have enormous amounts of wealth, none of it appeals to me. I'd just be the one driving around the old car, and yeah, I wouldn't be shooting the $100,000 camera.
No. The people that are spending that kind of money on that stuff they're the ones I think who are born into being rich, not necessarily who worked hard for it. Because you always think about the people that are real rich, like the coal mine industry, when like the top tier executives back then, they always had that like thing of being very frugal with their money, and that's how they saved so much. But I don't know. I guess I'll never find out.
And yeah, and since a camera like that is really designed, I mean, any large format camera, any camera in general really is designed for doing primarily, like art type photography. It almost sounds like if there was some company that came out with like golden paintbrushes that are encrusted in diamonds or something like that. It's like,
Yeah.
It defies the purpose of what it was created for. It's designed, cameras are designed more for actually getting used, more a very utilitarian thing. But
Yeah. And I mean,
I don't know. Who am I to judge?
it's a field camera too, so it's not even like it's not even meant necessarily for the studio only, like how a monorail type large format might be. So I could only imagine carrying that thing around in the woods and having that fall over in Death Valley, breaking.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. I was about to say, for $110,000, when that thing gets slammed to the ground by a 50-mile-an-hour gust in Death Valley, it better survive it. It won't, but it'll probably make a better dent in the ground than the wooden camera that I had that took a spill there. But yeah.
Yeah. On another note, though, so I've been picking up some used photo books from Abe Books, just because they're a lot cheaper than buying them new, and it's always nice, especially when they're like ones that you can't get unless you're spending like $250 on them, because now they've been out of print for a while.
Yeah.
And one of them that I picked up was "Listen to the Trees" by John Sexton.
Oh, nice.
And when I opened it up, I realized that it is signed and personally dedicated to someone. So I did a little bit of digging to figure out who this person was, because from how it read, this person obviously meant a lot to John, or at least how it appeared to me.
Yeah.
So it turns out, and I still am waiting on him to get back to me, or someone to, in order to confirm this, but it seems like it might be dedicated to Ruth Bernhard, who was a very good friend of John's, along with a pretty successful photographer. He has a newsletter that talks about her a little bit on the day that she had died. So yeah, I just thought that was a really cool little
that is
thing
fascinating.
to get.
I actually wasn't really familiar with her work, because I don't have a very good working knowledge of other photographers. But just doing a Google image search and viewing her work, Very expressive black and white imagery. Really, loaded with rich contrast and interesting subjects. What date did the book come out?
1985, I want to say.
Okay.
And this one, the dedication was dated 1994.
Interesting. And it looks like she passed away in 2006.
Yeah.
So the timing certainly works out. And it's not as though that is a fairly common name. So I would not be surprised if you are right about that. So that'll be fascinating if you're able to hear back from John Sexton about that, because that would really be interesting, just because that really takes on a whole nother twisted story in terms of how did the book end up there, and how did it travel to get there. Where's the place based that you purchased it from?
Let me look it up quick.
Because it looks like she lived in San Francisco. Or at least that's where she passed away. Originally born in Germany in 1905.
Yeah, she was 101 when she passed away.
Wow.
Let's see here.
And the day that we're recording this is also the day that we found out that Queen Elizabeth II has passed away.
Yeah.
So,
but this came from Indiana, I believe it is.
Indiana.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you get to wonder if it was part of a estate sale or something along those lines. It would be very interesting to see how they came upon that particular book, because that's if she was based on the West Coast and that came from Indiana, that is very very interesting indeed. So I would, if you hear back from John Sexton, that would be really, really interesting to hear his story on it, if that is indeed who is written to.
Yeah, and I mean, my big thing is just between the confirmation of it, but also, like, if she meant that much to him, I would love to have him have that book again.
Oh, yeah.
For his own, whatever you want to call it, collection or however.
Yeah.
Just because at the end of the day, the book cost me like $30 versus the regular 100 that it was. I'm like, whatever.
Yeah.
It's just still a cool story, even if I would like.
Yeah. And just the fact of that book going full circle, and he'll, would have the memory of where it was written, when it was handed off to her, and just this long journey that this book takes and eventually finds its way back. There's something really interesting about that. It almost seems like some part of a movie or something like that.
Yeah. We'll have to make a documentary about it. Just pitch it to Netflix.
I hear they're taking anything these days.
Kind of seems that way. Taking anything and then not renewing for season 2 for the stuff that deserves it. Cough, cough, Sandman.
Kind of like Fuji killing the film that we love.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Fuji is... them and Kodak are not in the best of terms with me. But
Though I will say on that topic, I've just been buying some Fuji Provia 8x10 whenever I could find it available. I just throw it in my chest freezer. And before going on my recent trip up to the White Mountains, I just pulled out all the boxes so I can organize them by date. So I made sure I use the oldest first.
Right.
And I was happy to see I had about 14 boxes in there, which was a fairly good stash. But yeah, we all know what happens in the long run with the films that we love.
Oh yeah. How did shooting black and white turn out for you? Or didn't you develop that yet?
I haven't developed it yet. I'll do that once I finish up the project I'm working on right now, which is working on the last stages of the ebook. But I do look forward to developing that, get a feel for it. I don't really like any of the color photos I shot on the trip. And I think it's because I was only there for a few days, and so I never really got into the rhythm of the trip. It was just a little quick weekend, but it was pretty good that. But speaking of film, there was a story I heard on the radio. This was, I don't know, maybe a week or so ago. And it was how Peter Jackson, who is the director of the Lord of the Rings movies, he had stated that he considered hypnosis so that he could forget the entire process involved in producing the movies. And it wasn't that he had any negative thoughts about the movies, but it was that he wasn't able to experience them as fans were able to experience them, just because of all the knowledge that went into the creation of them and everything involved with that. And while I was hearing that, it had me thinking a little bit about if something along those lines was possible, so that you could perhaps forget what was involved in shooting in maybe not all the photos, but some past work. It would be fascinating to see how a person's perception would change of that image, not having the experience in mind of actually capturing it, and whether we might be more drawn to some images, or there may be some images where it really only was the experience itself that draws us to that image. So it was a really fascinating thought to think about that and how that could work for other things as well. He didn't end up doing it. He didn't go through with it, but it is a really interesting concept. And so I was really, it was really interesting to hear that.
I could kind of relate that to waiting longer for like developing your own film and kind of letting it sit idly by for a bit, because eventually the memories start to fade a little in terms of the creation process with it. I mean, but ultimately you don't end up losing that memory forever like you would potentially with hypnosis. But that'd be interesting to experience.
Yeah. And it's something, and when you say it that way, it's something, I guess, that naturally occurs with time. Because a little while back, I did a project where I was going through and putting dates on all the photos on my website, just because, some of those pictures that are getting a bit older, I can't remember what year I shot them. I mean, some of them I can, yeah, but once I start going back to, 2010, 2011, 2012, in that range, it was just hard to keep track of it. So I went back to some of the videos so I can get the dates on them. But in some cases, the experience still is, something I very vividly remember. But in other cases, I couldn't even tell you where I shot some of them. If it's some canyon in Zion that I don't really remember the specifics of anymore. So I suppose it all naturally happens with age anyways. But it would be interesting. And it's definitely one of the parts about shooting film that I do enjoy, because also procrastination pays. And when I do get around to developing that black and white film, I will possibly still remember the experience of shooting it or not. I don't know. I guess we'll see.
Yeah, the whole hypnosis idea is, I kind of get a tinge of almost selfishness to it, in the sense that, and I don't think he ever meant it this way, or that most people would, but you could almost see that as being, I want to enjoy the greatness that I created like everybody else is able to, and having like almost like a hoity kind of perception of the work that you created that isn't necessarily true.
I see how that could be could ring true for some of it, though I would imagine that, and I have no knowledge of this whatsoever, but I would imagine that based on what he was saying, that he had to have been a fan of the books,
right?
And there's something magical about reading the books, and I mean, I haven't read those ones, but just, reading books in general, where you're just thrown into this magical world. But once you actually know what's involved in the production of the movie, and that's all you can think about. I guess you probably only see the flaws in it. You would see what what something was supposed to be, but wasn't quite able to be that for one reason or another. Which I think some people would love to have that sort of information, that sort of behind the scenes look. But perhaps if it's true that he was a true fan of the books and simply wants to have that sort of experience in the movies, not that one can ever really truly have that same experience with a movie. But I do see that was kind of what my initial thought was, based on hearing that. But again, I don't know too much about that. I just know I've seen the movies, but I haven't read the books.
I could imagine if you knew everything that went into it, though, you could get almost like a jaded response to it, though. Like kind of like how a lot of artists tend to kind of feel negatively about their work.
Yeah.
So then if you go through with like some kind of hypnosis with this, then and are able to forget the creation process as a whole and see the image with fresh eyes from a totally outside perspective, you could really see your work for how other people would be able to, in maybe like a better light, or it could be a worse light. You could point out flaws that you never thought you would ever see, but
it was just true, which is definitely fascinating. And I think as photographers, as artists, I think we tend to get caught up in the details. We'll notice that one tiny little thing in an image, something that bugs us, something where something's maybe like a little unbalanced, something's not quite right. That's the only thing that we can see. And we lose sight of the bigger picture. And I think that's really what a lot of that is about, in terms of just being able to enjoy the big picture and not really get caught up in the details as much. But I also think that with time, those little things that we find maybe stand in the way of what we were trying to create, I think those fade a little bit time, and we become we are more forgiving of those sort of things, which I think is one of the reasons why with time we perhaps have a little more of an appreciation for the stuff that was created. Because I know I get caught up in the details. I mean, even just working on the wording for the ebook that I'm working on right now. I mean, I'm just going through and changing like one word back and forth between two words to try to figure out which one is best. But as I'm going through and finishing up the writing on this and the proofreading and such, it's so easy for me to lose track of the big picture. I know the big picture is there, but I can't see it. All I can see are those little details. And so that's one of the things that really just, I don't know, I get lost in that. Has that been your experience at all when trying to fine tune, whether it's photography or writing or anything like that?
It's been happening a lot recently. So with this Mamiya, and I had mentioned it before about the project that I had in mind. So I ended up executing that, and I was talking on Tuesday for a little special episode of this with Murray Livingston, who's a UK photographer.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking a little bit about it. I exposed 6 rolls of 120 film, so about 60 photographs, and I'm working on putting together this ebook. And I also had the idea of releasing maybe 10 to 25 or so zines, physical copies of it, just for the fun of it. But man, trying to figure out what size to do, that has been killing me, because I want to match it between the ebook and the zine, so it's very easy. I can just kind of just print it or send off the ebook's PDF straight to like Maxim or Blurb or whoever I use. And so I want everything to be as like exact as I can, because that way I don't have to reformat everything, don't have to redo it completely. But
yeah, because otherwise you have to do it twice, really.
Yeah. And I want it where like if people buy the ebook and then they decide, oh, I'd really like how everything is laid out, I really like this, I would love a physical copy of it, then they can have that option to get a physical edition, and it's the same exact thing. It's like they took it from their computer screen and put it on their desk to look at.
Yeah.
So I think I figured it out. I think I'm going to go kind of like with Lensworks monographs, they're 8-inch by 9-inch in size. So I think I'm pretty happy with that. But all this week has just been like in the back of my head, all right, what size am I going to do? How am I going to be able to do this so that it's not too big, but it's also not too small and like oddly shaped?
Is that in portrait orientation with the 9 inches being the height?
I'm going to do it horizontal. So 9 inches.
Horizontal.
Width.
Got it.
Yeah. I think most of the photographs that I took are horizontal, so it kind of just makes more sense to favor it that way.
Yeah, because when I did the book with Kozu back in 2020, most of my pictures are horizontal, and they suggested doing a vertical, which to me initially seemed it seemed like that wasn't necessarily the ideal format for what I was doing. But I actually came to love the vertical format because when you look at the surface area of the page spreads, once it's, open and you're flipping between them, that is actually a very ideal shape. And versus if it was a horizontal, then you have a really long format book once it's opened up. And it was something I really hadn't considered before because I just went straight to, it's got to be in landscape orientation. In the end, I was glad I did vertical, though for a zine, it's going to be a bit different, and especially with the fact that you shoot mostly horizontal. Do you think you're going to have any verticals in there at all?
Yeah, I definitely will have a couple of them.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm just going through the process. I just finished scanning the 4th roll, and I have 2 more rolls to do that are drying in the closet as we speak. But my big thing was that this is an ebook project, and I really don't know if I like how a vertical ebook looks.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why I'm favoring the horizontal when it comes to the zine as well. Like you were saying, it can be very wide when it's opened up, and I don't necessarily care for that. That's why I've been going back and forth so much with size. But yeah. I think the 8x9 kind of just works well enough. It's almost square, so it's not super wide when it's fully opened.
Yeah.
And it's still small enough that it's nice and compact and feels good in the hand, but it's big enough to really display the images properly.
Yeah. I think the thing that gets tricky, because I mean the aspect ratio you're using is really good because it is, like you said, it is not far from a square. I think it's really more so when I was thinking of the horizontal books, is more of the ones when they're designed more to match like a 2x3 aspect ratio. Then you get like this really long book when it opens up, which
really long
I can see would be good for like these double page spreads that are panoramic in nature. When I do for my ebook, it's basically pretty much, I think it's exactly a 4x5 aspect ratio, horizontal. And so horizontal images will display really well there. But with the ebook, since there's no, gutter in the middle as opposed to an actual zine or book where you have the page that open wide, you do treat the space a little bit differently than if it was actually something that was printed. And one other thing that I was thinking of when I was on the trip recently and I was listening to Jeffrey Sidoris's podcast with Sean Tucker, Sean was talking about how he has, I think it was his book that he came out with a little while back, and he offered it in audiobook, he offered it in written form, I think also like a ebook, and he had people purchase all 3 different variations of it, and it was the same thing but just a little bit of a different format. So when you're talking about the wanting the ebook to have the same format as the zine, from a design standpoint, yes, it would be nice to have that consistency. But also, I see how some people might also perhaps purchase both, even if it is the same content that is delivered a little bit differently with a different, different sort of layout. It just means more work for you as a photographer, but
Right.
it's
Yeah.
not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, because I know that Sean was talking that a lot of people would purchase the ebook version for actually reading because it's easier to read on a Kindle, like on the go kind of thing. The audiobook, just because then you get a totally different perception when he's reading it versus when you had read it, different like incantations, that kind of thing. And then
Yeah.
they would buy the physical copy because they wanted it to look nice and pristine on their shelf, kind of deal. So that's kind of what I was thinking along the same lines, was of offering both the ebook and the zine. But
Yeah.
I'd be curious after putting the word out, after I get it all finished up and everything, doing like a little pre-order and see what kind of interest there is in the project as like a zine, because there's no way that I'm gonna be able to drop the money to fund it completely. I mean, it's not that much doing a zine, but still, I want to see
there's an
where the
initial
interest
investment.
lies. Yeah, I don't want to put that initial investment into 25 copies and then all of a sudden I don't get anything back out of it. I'm just sitting there with 25 copies of this book.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. And one thing I was thinking about doing, I don't think I mentioned this last time, but one thing I'm thinking about doing for the ebook is to actually do an audio book for it, which isn't something that is, I mean, there's a lot of visuals in it, but I also think that it could perhaps be something that maybe people would listen to while they flip through it, and maybe that would give a different sort of experience as well. So that was something I was also considering doing, because it's written in a way that is the same way that I would say it. So it's a more conversational way that I wrote it. So that was another thing that I was planning on doing, and this is also based on hearing that conversation with Sean and Jeffrey.
I think that would go really well for that idea you were telling me about last week. I don't remember if that was while we were recording or when we were finished, but you were saying about doing a like when you go to Bristlecone Pines and you do each photograph and you have a written, like, your thoughts and everything while you're in that area. I think that would be a really good ebook to do that with, to integrate that audio voiceover to it, because then people of get it like almost like in a movie when they're showing you a letter on the screen and you can read it, but then you have the actor or the whoever. Yeah. I think that would be pristine. That'd be a great idea for that.
Yeah, that's something I know I'm gonna have to experiment with some of the ebook option, or not the ebook, but some of the ebook stuff as well as some of the zine stuff. I think there's so many interesting formats that are out there. So it just, like anything, it just takes time. And
yeah, it does.
Yeah. I still don't get how the fact that I'm now doing this full time. I've been doing this for 2 years now, full time, but it's still, there's not enough time to get the projects done. There's so many things that I want to do, and it seems like on most days it feels like I didn't really do anything at all. Somehow it all, all these projects get done. But I think it's just when you eat away at things like a little bit at a time, but you don't have these big milestones in terms of, I completed this particular project. But before I decided to do photography as a career, I just figured, I'd have so much time to work on stuff. But now it's just, I don't know. It's weird. It's really weird.
That's even like scanning this film in the past, like all yesterday. So I initially scanned everything in just like very straight scans without doing any editing to opening up shadows and flatten out the negatives themselves. But then I was thinking about that, and I'm like, well, that's really dumb, because some of these are pretty dark. Like, they're handheld at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, where the light wasn't as bright as I wanted it to be. So I'm like, that's kind of dumb not to take advantage of the technology. So I had to rescan the first 2 or 3 rolls. But even just doing that all yesterday for the first 2 was just kind of like, at the end of the day, I'm like, I don't feel like I did anything at all. yet that's still a massive step in the right direction for this project.
Yeah.
So it's weird how time works with that.
Yeah, it's a matter of more long-term thinking on projects. Though I will say that this whole week since I've been in the final stages for the ebook and the writing's basically done, I'm throwing in the layouts and stuff. I feel like I have an enormous sense of progress and actually getting stuff done. So I think it comes to that sense of completion in the end. But it really is a bizarre sort of experience where everything just melts together and also physically melts together because it's hot and humid in my office right now, which is just my brain isn't working great. So I apologize if I'm rambling, but yeah.
Isn't this whole podcast just us rambling?
Yeah,
kind of be
that's
derived down
that's
to
very
such.
true. Lots of
Should
rambling.
have called it Creative Rambles.
Yes. So we have this list here where we have all these various topics, and there's one that you put down here, which I'm curious to hear what your thoughts on it. Which is, you will never be one of the greats. Does legacy matter? And you have some other notes on there as well. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about that.
Okay, yeah. Now that I found it, I can better remember what I was thinking when I wrote it down.
Yeah.
That kind of goes in the idea of like everybody wanting to be the next Ansel Adams. Like, I mean, when I first started with doing landscape photography specifically, and then with black and white to really make it more niche, it was that whole idea of I want to be the next Ansel Adams, like constantly running in the back of my head.
Mm-hmm.
But then as time goes on, you kind of realize that no, you're probably never going to be. You're probably never going to be the next Ansel Adams, the next great thing for photography or for anything, really. So it's kind of like, it's that thinking of, does the legacy that you are trying to create actually matter when you're looking at it from a really broad perspective?
Yeah.
Because, like we've said before, we're just like blips in the universe. So in 100 years, Ansel Adams is going to be forgotten, and you most certainly will be. So you're trying to build up this whole idea and entity for yourself, this legacy of leaving something behind, but no one's really going to care.
It is a tricky thing. And I think those that do stand out were in the right place at the right time, you know, whether it was technology that was coming out, you know, new processes, things along those lines, new ways of sharing work. And it is interesting because you would think that if a person is so inspired by that, it's not going to lead to that point. It seems like now, especially with technology and everything else, it seems like if a person is going to have a legacy, they really essentially have to be the first to do something. They have to be the first to come up with a particular way of doing something, particular subject matter, using some sort of new technology along those lines. And when I was looking at that question, I mean, my first thing is I have no desire to be one of the greats, as it says there. I think that's something that just happens to people that were in the right place at the right time. And also, I would imagine they got to be pretty good at marketing too. I think that's also a pretty strong component of that. And also now with social media, with people able to put stuff out there, it seems like we have such a short attention span as a society that, you know, once someone is onto something, everyone's moved on to something else.
That kind of draws into what we were talking about before when it comes to, like,
yeah,
Ansel Adams is known for a couple single images. You and I, if we ever are known, are going to be known for our entire portfolios or collections of images, rather.
Yeah.
And I think that draws right into the whole attention span aspect of it, because like most of our images are just like scrolled past on social media platforms. They're not really absorbed. Like when you hold a book
Yeah.
or an actual print, that's whether you're holding it or it's on your desk or on a wall, you get to look at it and really just take it in for what it is. Whereas when you're on Instagram and you see a post, it's just kind of, oh, cool, look at that, double click it to like it or whatever, and scroll past the next cat meme. I mean,
Yeah. And I also think that when it comes down to if they do have a dream to get somewhere big with what they're doing, it's almost a little bit like if a person is like as I'm driving through my neighborhood and stuff, I'll see where people have planted trees sometimes in an area where that tree has no hope of growing, and it just seems bizarre, really, that there's like this little spot of dirt and they plant this tree that I know that tree is going to be like a 50-foot tall tree if it keeps growing, but it can't because it doesn't really have
the potential
the space
for
to
it.
do that.
Yeah.
And so I see, the way I see it, at least with my own photography, is that so many of the decisions I make are done more so in the present. I'm not thinking about long-term stuff. Ultimately, it does come down to, there's bills to pay, there's projects to work on. But I do think it takes a special person to get to the point where, if they do have that dream of being, great, it takes a lot of work to get there. And they gotta plant that tree somewhere where it has room to grow. And it just feels like things are so crowded now that it really is difficult to have that ability to, plant something where it has that room to grow. And, by the time, that comes around, people have moved on to something else. But I'm definitely more thinking about the present when I'm out shooting photos. I have, like, I don't know what my goal is going to be in, 10 years from now. I have no clue other than doing more of the same. Do you ever think about like what, I mean, you're younger than I am, so you're on the upward trend. I'm kind of leveling off right now.
I would not call my trend upward, but okay.
Yeah, you have plenty of room to grow versus I'm like, all right, 40 years old, got a house, got a dog and 2 cats, got an awesome wife. It's not as though I'm going to like skyrocket up from here. Not that I even want to, I'm very happy with where I am.
I mean, I think you just having a house right now is just you already being tiers above most people these days, which is
true,
terrible,
which is very, very true. Yeah. But it is the sort of thing where even looking back at, like whether it was, I don't know, 20 years ago or so, when I was freshly graduated from college and such, or maybe not quite graduated yet, but not far from it. You don't really know what the future is going to hold. There's like this excitement that comes with it, as well as some degree of large amounts of anxiety of how am I going to make a living? But I've never really thought too much about the future. I've never had, a desire to be something great. I think it's really about just being more in the present. But I'm curious. Where do you see yourself in 10 years with your art and your photography and your writing and such?
I honestly have no idea, because right now I'm kind of at, and I think we've talked about this off the air, to use fancy speech. I'm kind of at a crossroads where I have no idea what I want out of life. Like,
Yeah.
I know that in a ideal world, I would be the next guy tall, so to speak. Like, that I would be able to go and just do my photography and my writing for a living.
Yeah.
And not really have to worry terribly about print sales, or like I know that guy does workshops, but like to not have to worry so much about making a ton of money, I guess is what it comes down to. And
Yeah.
to just be able to enjoy life for what it is, and the creation of art for what it and nature provides, and just enjoy life, really, just to live a simple life.
Yeah.
And so where this crossroads kind of comes in at is I struggle tremendously because I have this goal in mind, but trying to navigate how to get there is really difficult. Like it's the impossible task.
Yeah.
And so trying to figure out like I want to get from A to Z as fast as possible, but I'm also ignoring B through Y kind of deal
Yeah.
of like the various steps. And right now a lot of that revolves around like me going for my master's and not really knowing for sure if it's the right path for me, because all of my passion, all of my interest, all of my desire, so to speak, really lies in nature and art. And like doing this podcast, doing the writing that I do, working for NPN like I do, I all enjoy that stuff, but it's not sustainable in terms of a monetary fashion. And so trying to figure out, okay, is teaching right for me? Like, do I have the passion and the drive to deal with 20 to 30 kids in a classroom for an hour, and then switch to the next class where like it's tough.
Yeah.
And if I do decide that, okay, I'm going to stop my pursuit of my master's program, then where do I go from there? Do I get a job at Wawa for $15 an hour and just hope that ends meet? Or it gets difficult. So
it's a tricky time for
even
sure.
think about like 10 years in the future is, at least right now, like almost impossible for me. I know where I want to be.
Yeah.
But it's the getting there that is really difficult.
And when you're going from A to Z, but the Z happens to be a moving target that keeps getting a little further away as you go, you're like chasing the mirage at a certain point. That definitely is a tricky one for sure. It is a tough one because, like, when I graduated from college, when I got the job at the camera store, it was because I was at the time shooting some sports stuff for San Diego State University. I was shooting for the school newspaper and stuff, and there was a person who was also shooting the games just because he enjoyed shooting the games and had connections, so he had credentials to get on the field and shoot and stuff. And so I was talking to him, and he worked at Nelson Photo. So I said, hey, you should come down to Nelson Photo if you need a summer job. And so that was back in 2004. So I went in there, 6 months later, and they hired me on. And then from 2004 through 2020, I worked there. And, it was a good environment because I was able to, I made some connections, met a bunch of people. It was at that point that I was able to get a better understanding on film and film photography and large format and stuff like that, just because I was able to handle the equipment. But at the same time, from 2004 through 2020, which is a long span of time, it went by very fast. And I do remember at the time I was doing shooting some other sports stuff at the time. And I do remember mentioning like, oh, I'm shooting some of this sports stuff for the time being. And I was talking to someone who had, I can't remember what he was doing at the time, but he had been doing some of that sort of stuff as well. And he had said something along the lines of, if you're just doing it for the time being, you're going to end up doing that for like 15, 20 years unless you have some plan to, grow beyond that. And ultimately I lost interest in doing the sports stuff. So I just stopped doing that. But even working at the camera store, looking at how people now are able to, earn a living with photography in their, 20s, 30s fairly easily. It was a good environment, but also it does feel like there was some lost time there, because time does go by so fast. It really is absurd how fast time goes.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I think my big thing is I've stuck myself in this little niche, which I love. I enjoy the hell out of the art that I'm creating and the writings that I'm doing. But it's not as conducive to print sales, to the stereotypical ways of making a living off photography, as what it would be if I were doing like very bright, saturated colored scenes of epic sunsets and over like mountain ranges and that kind of thing.
With a barrel cactus in the foreground.
Well, of course, you need something. You need something really cool in the foreground. You need a flower or something.
Yeah,
always in the foreground.
Yeah,
but I think that makes it really difficult for trying to make it a little bit quicker to make a living off of this. Yeah. And I think the big thing for me is trying to find magazines and publications to write for is the impossible dream. I mean, right now I have 2 different publications that I'm just waiting to hear back from. Like, I submitted an article to the one, and I'm just waiting. Okay, are you going to accept this, or should I try pushing it somewhere else?
Yeah.
And the other one is just waiting to see what kind of compensation they're going to be giving for each article. Because both of them seem interested in having me write for them, but the response time is just, there's a lot to be left desired there. Which makes it tough, because there's so much uncertainty already, and now you just add to that even more.
Yeah, and that's a side that I think so many people don't see when it comes to work that's put out there, whether it's people's photography, their writing, whatever it is. We only see the final product. We don't really see what all was involved in the creation, everything that led up to that. Which gives a different perception of how, what the reality of things truly are. And so
I think there's a beneficial side to this as well, though. So by that, I mean, I'm struggling to get my work pushed onto publications and such, but it's starting to make me think, okay, how else can I bring some money in?
Yeah.
And now I've turned to like this ebook project. And I also have a project for an ebook that's going to be a straight ebook that's going to be 10 essays on meaning, because that's the primary topic for a lot of my writings.
Mm-hmm.
10 essays that have never been published anywhere before. And I'm just going to go with that and make an ebook for that and sell it for like $15 or $25 each, something like that. I'll figure that out later. But
it is the classic thing of, adversity is going to sort of force innovation at times. And very seldom do we look back at that innovation and say, oh, that was bad. It's usually something that ends up being, puts us down a good road in the long run. And I know that that's definitely been the case for many of my experiences where I, run into a roadblock for one reason or another, but then you find some other road that was a better road anyways. But it definitely does give a degree of uncertainty, especially when there are bills to be paid. I hope you enjoyed our creative banter. You can learn more about Cody's work by visiting his website, codyschultz.com. And you can find my work at benhorn.com. For further discussion, join us at patreon.com/creativebanter. It's a place where we can interact with you, the listener. And although we greatly appreciate those who contribute by joining a tier, discussions are open to everyone, whether you're a paying member or not. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you around next time.